We're headed to the airport. Got little Eli with me. We are going to, well, Eli and I are heading to St. Peter to help my dad with his very first ever book signing. Yeah. What? So it's gonna be epic. We made it through. There's the planes behind us. Flying Southwest. You excited?
Hello.
What you so excited about?
Woo!
Well, you're so excited. We're at the airport.
Yeah, the airport.
Okay, we just landed in Denver, Colorado, and we will be here for 3.5 hours, right, Eli? Before we have to board another plane to go to Minneapolis, Minnesota, because, you know, I did a layover kind of situation so we could save a couple $100. Might not have been a great idea with a 4-year-old with me, but that's where we are. Eli just pointed out to me there's a big airplane inside here. Do you see it? It's pretty cool. Getting a little lunch, I guess, late lunch at the Denver airport. Eli got a Impossible sandwich. It's like a vegetarian version of a ham sandwich. And I got some kind of tofu, rice, veggie stir fry kind of situation here. So we'll enjoy this and then we'll get on with it. Oh my gosh, it's 1 in the morning and we're waiting for his car seat. We'll see what happens. So we're here. It's about 1:30 in the morning. We lost track of the lady I bonded with on the plane that I was going to stay at. That's okay. Maybe it's for the best. So we're waiting for a lift to come. Can you see my breath? It's currently 24 degrees. I'm freezing, but I took off my jacket because Eli is freezing. And he's sitting in his car seat, shivering. So I was like, yeah, I had to give him my jacket. We'll get to St. Peter one of these days. Even though it's like 90 miles, this time of night, there's like no traffic. So at least we have that going for us. It is 3 in the morning, well, a little after 3. We made it here. I'm staying in my mom's room. Eli passed out with his coat on. What a week it's gonna be. Look at my dad, he's on the front page of the newspaper. They did this whole write-up on him. My parents were gonna go like take an ad out in the paper to talk about their book, and I said, Dad, Mom, just go down there and tell them to interview you. And they did.
Truman was president. Life expectancy was 62 years. Meryl Streep was born.
Can I make a suggestion here?
Yeah, do that.
Okay. So when you're talking about like how much the prices cost at the time,
Yeah.
make a segue and tie that into how that fits into the Hundredaire. When you only have so little, how can you be generous?
Yeah.
You know, the stories of you're letting people know what the costs were and how much people made back then. How does that tie into like the story of your dad giving that $100 when he didn't even have a job at the time?
Yeah.
So make some kind of a segue that always leads back to the book and how it came about. Otherwise, here's what happens. People listen and they can zone out if they don't know like what does this apply to me? What does this have to do with anything?
Yeah.
So just make that connection for them.
Yeah.
It was fun.
What was fun?
I was throwing snow at Grandpa.
Oh, you threw snowballs at Grandpa? Okay. We're going for a walk with my parents on the walking track.
Is this
Go,
where
Eli. Dad's gonna rest after going up these stairs. There's basketball going on. And then there's a walking track up top, which is where we are. A little envious of the ball players downstairs, so guess we're gonna check that out. Getting ready for the book launch. Mom made bars. Look how precise she is. She can't even cut bars without measuring that they're the perfect size. If we're gonna do it, we gotta do it right.
That's right. I don't have a ruler, so I had to use a yardstick.
She said she was procrastinating on cutting these bars. I'm like, we'll just cut the bars. She said, but last time I cut them and the pieces weren't even. How many of you guys are perfectionists like that? Like kind of borderline OCD. It's not me. It's definitely my mom. If I cut them, they would be all different kinds of sizes.
Is it so hard?
You did it and it's so hard. I didn't see that.
I will be putting these almonds in each little bar. Well, Dad, are you excited?
Well, I'm not awake yet from this morning.
All
But
right.
Okay, I'm excited.
Let's get going to your book launch.
Okay, well, thank you very much. What's happening?
Hey, are you excited for your book launch?
Oh, yes, very much so. After all these years, we're finally putting it together. And it couldn't have been done without my daughter, Katherine.
What? Here we go. We are here at the location for my dad's book launch, which is Sunrise. Can I zoom in? No, I'll get it from the other angle. Over here. You excited, Eli? We're here. The location for my dad's book launch. Going into the book signing. Oh my goodness.
Mommy, come on!
Okay, lead the way. Book signing. Yes.
Yeah!
Yes, we're here. We haven't started yet. I wanted to show you how cool these centerpieces were that my mom made. Like, she thinks of everything. My dad's relaxing with his buddies. We have yet to start. They're getting the refreshments ready. We got a nice backdrop. My dad's books. I brought a few of mine. There's Mama. The ladies are working hard in the kitchen.
What are you doing?
Just seeing the ladies working hard in the kitchen, getting all the snacks ready. Look at that. Wow. I had requested fruit. I said, you know, some of us are not eating bars these days. And today we have Eli helping out.
Special thanks to Rodney and Kenny and Jerry and Debbie and my daughter Katie, and then oftentimes the wife is in the background, and Arlene's been doing a lot to make this day possible. And so thank you, Arlene, and thank the rest of you. How this book, I've been writing stories for 40 years, and the way it got going was I had all these relatives that would just love, and then like when I was in the military, I wanted to write each one a letter. Well, that got to be a full-time job. So then I thought, what if I just send out a story that will connect with everybody. And so then I started sending stories. Then I kept in contact with my kids as they grew up and everything. And I really enjoyed it. But I really got impressed when, you know, there's such a thing as a hermit. And what's the other one?
A recluse.
A recluse. So when I was 12 years old in 1949, I used to go around on horseback. Boy, that really puts you in an age bracket, doesn't it? You go by horse, you know. Yeah, and they were still farming with horses back in 1949. Yeah, the Betty here pointed to herself, yeah. And in 1949, the minimum wage was 40 cents an hour, and then it jumped to 70 cents an hour. Well, then you go a couple more years down the road, then I was making $2 an hour. And I thought, oh boy, we're just rolling it in, you know. And we'd work 10-hour days, and you'd get $20 for a day of hard work. And my Caney partner, Jack, you know, I don't think you're charging $2 an hour, are you, Jack? No. I didn't think so.
So back to the recluse and the hermit.
Yeah.
You know, you have a story in here about one of the recluses that you used to have run-ins with,
Yeah.
Frank. Do you want to talk a little about him?
Okay, well,
Little backstory?
she's maybe gonna read a little bit too, but there was a guy who would come to our grocery store in Cortland. He'd come on horseback, and he lived in a dynamite shack out in the abandoned redstone quarries. And he would get his groceries, we'd put them in the boxes, and then when he went home for the evening, he couldn't carry all of that on horseback. So my dad and I would bring his groceries back to the quarry, you know, and but
Should we
anyway.
read a little from the
Yeah,
book?
why don't you read a little
Okay.
from the book?
I won't
about-
read the whole story, but this is about Frank. So Frank, this cowboy who lived in the dynamite shack, he had a crush on my sister Sharon,
Yeah.
who was about 14 years of age. When Frank got his weekly load of groceries at the store, Sharon was there working. Frank was 37 years old, and he would say to my dad, "Ward, I'd be willing to give you $25 for that cute little cowgirl. You bet she'd make a nice wife."
Yeah,
I never knew if Frank was serious or fooling.
yeah.
Ward had an easy laugh and just went along with him. Sharon, of course, was interested in movie cowboys. She liked those sissies like Roy Rogers and Gene Autry. My pals and I liked Hopalong Cassidy and the Durango Kid. They could shoot fast and beat up the bad guys. They didn't go around kissing girls and riding off into the sunset.
Yeah.
Even as a young boy, I noted how Dad dealt with various cast-offs in society. In Cortland, they were individuals relegated to be the perennial lepers beside the road in life. But I saw him treat them in the same dignified manner he'd treat anyone else, whether a single mom, a secretary, a janitor, or a rich banker. This was different than how I saw others treat them. Those who crossed the other side of the street so as not to pass them, or who would gossip about them rather than try to understand them or even pray for them. After Foster Jack Spratt's store closed at 10 o'clock on Saturday nights, Ward, my dad, would drive to the Redstone Quarry to deliver Frank's groceries. I would often ride with him down the gravel road where a run-down abandoned house sat next to the rendering works. Dad would have me leave the groceries that Frank had ordered earlier in the evening on the porch of that house. Frank would then pick them up after work and take them back to his shack. After his purchase of groceries, Frank would head over to Leo Walter's bar to find social acceptance. Wow! Grandma Gail made a grand entrance. So, after his purchase of groceries, Frank would head over to Leo Walter's bar to find social acceptance. He smelled from working in the plant and was unshaven, but at the bar, he was treated well. He never would have been accepted at our straight church due to his lower social class and standing. I often thought sometimes that perhaps the cross was on the wrong building, but then again, maybe that's too harsh of a judgment. Frank would drink too much, and in an attempt
to find a little degree of joy in his bleak life. When the bar closed, he'd stagger out to his tethered horse, manage to get his foot into a stirrup and mount the saddle and head for home. If he was too out of it and completely slumped over, it was okay because the horse knew the way home. So, other than getting hit by a car, Frank usually got home safely. But then one Saturday night, Frank got so drunk he fell down while trying to mount his horse. He had one foot caught in the stirrup. The horse started for home, slowly dragging Frank along the gravel edge of the highway. A crowd gathered as people tumbled out of the town's 2 bars. People were laughing at Frank's predicament. Kids and young teenagers were running up and down the street, poking fun at old drunk Frank. If the horse had been spooked or frightened, she would have more than likely broke into a run and dragged Frank to his death. My dad, Ward, saw what was happening and he left the store. He went over and grabbed the reins of the horse and tied her to a tree. My dad was very angry. He scolded the crowd of people for their insensitive ways. Ward treated people with dignity. He didn't care whether Frank had social status or not. He didn't care that he was a recluse or had no money or education. He saw someone hurting. It was more than a physical hurt. It was a life hurt. And even though all these people were making fun of Frank, and even though they were Dad's customers and neighbors, Dad didn't care about the possibility of losing business. He cared about human dignity, which should not be denied to those who the world would deem unworthy of it. And I might add sheepishly that each customer and neighbor slowly walked away. Dad helped Frank out of the stirrup and put his horse in a safe place. I stood outside the family store and watched Dad load Frank into his old 37 Ford and drive off, driving Frank back to Redstone.
Frank worked in the rendering works, and they'd gather up dead animals all over the county. And when my friends and I would go in there, they were cutting them up, and all the fluids from these dead animals ran into a drain in the middle of the building, and it went straight into the river. And we boys, not knowing any better, swam 6 blocks down from where all this terrible stuff went in the river. And then I've always said, that's why I'm so short. I'm drinking all of that water. You know? So, okay. Back in 1949, when I was 12 years old, and I went around seeing all these guys that were recluses, one man lived in a tool shed in a gravel pit. There's a lady we knew, Cora Atkins. She lived in an abandoned house, no water, no heat, right through the winter, no bathroom. I mean, it was really, but the story I remember about Cora, I don't know if that's in the book or not. Yeah,
Cora's in here. Yeah, the story's in here.
I'll give us a real little short synopsis of Cora. This was, okay, in 1949, she dressed like they did back in the 20s. And she always wore high heels and the dresses and she'd walk to New Orleans, 7 miles away, to clean for the rich people. But most people knew Cora, and as they were coming along, they would stop, pick her up, and take her to New Orleans. But one of my favorite stories about Cora is when she'd come in the store, she'd take bananas that were turning black, cans that were dented, in the back of the freezer, meat that was starting to turn green, and Cora always bought this stuff. And when she brought it to the checkout counter, my dad would charge her maybe a nickel, a dime, or whatever. And I says, Dad, why don't you just give her that stuff? I mean, it's gonna be thrown out anyway. He says, no, the reason I'm doing what I'm doing is so she doesn't lose her dignity. And so she feels that she's contributing. And there's a lot of people in life, maybe all they need is a little respect, you know. Did you have anything more you want to say on that?
Not about Cora.
Okay. In 1949, if you can believe this, the average pay for a family was $3,000 for a year for a family of 4. Well, my dad bought me a bicycle, and that was $100. Now that was really big money. back in 1949, and I always remembered that sacrifice. It was later on in life, you know, that I remembered that sacrifice.
Speaking of $100,
Yeah.
maybe we should share a little bit from the story The Hundredaire, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
where I got the title for the book.
Yeah, it's the name of. Many of you here are the age where you've probably watched The Millionaire, and this guy would appear at someone's home, and he'd say, "We've been watching you, and you know you're worthy," and he'd hand them a check for $100, just out of the blue, and then the guy would disappear into the night. Well, connected to that, we had an uncle who would help us in life and do a lot. My dad couldn't fix anything, but this uncle could fix everything. He was just talented that way in life. And then we'd always offer him money. He wouldn't take any money. So what we did, my dad and I, we typed up a letter from.
Do you want to, should I read this part of
Why
the story?
don't you read that part of the story?
So Dad said to me, we have to find a way to reward or thank him for his kindness. And then you guys got the idea
Yeah.
from the TV show. You have been watched and your kind deeds have been noted. Then the agent from the TV show The Millionaire would surprise someone with a check for $1 million and they would disappear into the night. The thing was, his dad was unemployed at the time and didn't have money. So how were they going to do that? So they decided to hatch a plan to compensate Ben for his goodwill towards the family. My dad didn't have $1 million, but he did have $100. So he had me craft a letter and type it using the storyline from The Millionaire. Dear Mr. Norman, you have been watched and your kind deeds have been noted. At the time, we couldn't afford to do this. However, we wanted to reward Ben for his good deeds. So Dad placed a crisp new $100 bill in the envelope and he had me mail it with no return address. The letter was signed, yours truly, the Hundredaire. 2 days later, Ben came storming over to the house saying we had sent him $100. Of course, we all denied this dastardly deed. As the weeks went by, Ben finally gave up trying to get a confession or admission of guilt from the foster family. Not too long after Dad sent this gift to Ben, along came a man by the name of John, is it Rule? John Rule?
John Rule, yeah.
John Rule. He owned a one-man taxi operation, and my dad, Ward, finally got a part-time job for about $1 an hour driving a taxi cab. It was not exactly money made in heaven, but he was grateful for the work. Over the years, Ben always gruffly accused my dad of sending the money. Dad, with a straight face, always denied it. Later, my dad passed away of a heart attack while driving down a hill on Old Highway 22. Witnesses say they saw him slump over the steering wheel as the car propelled into a cement bridge support at 60 miles an hour. He was crushed instantly. I had the job of taking care of Dad's affairs and settling the estate. I found a mysterious deposit in my father's checking account for $100. Mother had not made the deposit, and I couldn't understand this. I went down to the bank to inquire of the teller that I knew. The teller smiled and said that a mysterious benefactor had made the $100 deposit.
Well, back in 1949, you could buy a new car for $1,400. Imagine that. Bread was 14 cents a loaf, gas 17 cents a gallon. And I don't know, fitting with the times, there's a poem I've always liked, and I think it kind of fits with what we're talking about. And it's called Jake the Cowboy. Jake the Cowboy went out to fix a distant fence. The wind was cold and gusty, and the clouds rolled by, gray and dense. And as he pounded the last staple in, gathered his tools to go, the temperature had fallen, and the wind and snow began to blow. When he finally reached his pickup truck, he felt a heavy heart, for he knew from the sound of that ignition that it would not start. They found him 3 days later, frozen stiff in that old truck. Now Jake had been around in life and he had done his share of roaming. But when he finally reached heaven, why, he was shocked. It looked just like Wyoming. Of all the saints in heaven, St. Peter was his favorite. Now this line ain't needed, but it helps with the rhyme and meter. So they sat and talked a minute or two, or maybe it was 3. Nobody was keeping score, for in heaven, time's free. I've often heard Jake said to Pete that God will always answer prayer. But the one time I asked for help, well, he just plain wasn't there. Does God answer the prayers of some and ignore the prayers of others? Well, maybe it's the time of the day. Maybe it's the weather. Maybe it's the season. Now, I ain't trying to act smart, but I was wondering, could you tell me what the heck's the deal? Peter listened very attentively, and when he was done, there were signs of recognition, and he said, so you're the one. That day your truck, it wouldn't start, and you sent your prayer flying. You gave us all a real hard time, with hundreds of us trying. 1,000 angels rushed to check the status of your file. But you know, Jake, we ain't heard from you in quite a long while. And although all prayers are answered and God ain't got no quota, he didn't recognize your voice and started a truck in Minnesota. So,
So speaking of the times and not having enough, you've got a story in here called Sufficiency. It's not about the money. Should we share from that one?
I think that's a good idea.
Okay. Once upon a time, there was a wealthy Texas rancher who threw a huge party at his ranch. The people came from near and far. They were business associates, neighbors, rich and poor, plus an odd assortment of artists and politicians. At the height of the barbecue gala, the rich castle baron said he had something to show his guests, and he led the party out behind one of his huge barns. There, he showed the assembled people a well-lit, Olympic-sized swimming pool. He said, I have a standing order to issue a check for $100,000 to anyone who can swim across the pool. The people drew closer to the pool and saw that it was filled with alligators. Those large aquatic reptiles looked mean and hungry. Suddenly, at the far end of the pool, there was a tremendous splash. An impetuous young man was swimming for his life. Alligators turned and surged towards the young man. He swam with remarkable speed as he turned and dodged the snapping, angry alligator's teeth. One seized his lower pant leg, but he was able to kick him away. He barely made it to the far end of the pool. Sympathetic hands reached down and pulled him out before those mean critters got him. Surprisingly, he still had all his limbs and, of course, was lucky to be alive. The old rancher said, Son, that was some incredible swimming. It's worth it to me to witness such an astounding fast action. How would you like the money? I can give you cash, write you out a check, or I can give you cattle options. The young hero, still sputtering and shaking, said, All I want to know is who pushed me. This story has 4 basic elements to the illustration. First, there's the unknown risk. Then there's the push into danger. And then finally, the fantastic reward. The Bible is the push into dangerous waters of life. Besides being a guide for living, it says a lot about giving, trusting, and rewards. There will always be risk of the alligators of life. Obligations, doing fun things before paying bills, and of course, the fear of giving, investing and saving, and being able to live off of whatever's left. However, you can successfully navigate the swimming pool of life and its alligators. The rewards are incredible. The Lord promises in His Word that He will open the floodgates of heaven if we are obedient in this area of life. I'm proof that it's possible to have all the money you need and be joyous giving it away. Put God first in your life. Then, beyond a wholesome discipline, be gentle with yourself. Love life, for it is still a beautiful world. I think you said a lot. You said a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
But you know, most people here know you as a house painter.
Yeah.
And a lot of these book stories are from your childhood, but you've got one in here from when you were house painting here in St. Peter.
Yeah.
Do you want to share just a smidge from that?
There was a lady by the name of Nellie, and she wasn't wealthy. She had a real small house, and you know, we're going back 30 years, so our bid to paint this little house was $1,400. Well, we whipped through that in no time at all, and so I said to my cousin Dennis, who was helping me, that was just too much money, and she can't afford it. We should reduce the bid. Well, Dennis said, she's a proud old lady, and she's not gonna settle for that. So we went to the house, and she was sitting real astute, looking at us. Well, first of all, before we went into the house, what we'll do to reduce the bill, we'll pull the old birthday trick on her. Well, what's that, the old birthday trick? Well, so we went up to the table where she was gonna write out the check, and I said, Dennis, did you remember Nellie's birthday last year? He said,
How am I supposed to remember all these customers' birthdays?
yeah. And then I said, well, then he said to me, Donald.
Did you remember her birthday the year before?
Yeah, and no. So we got $200 off the bill, and we thought, well, she's sitting there thinking that those two painters are drunk or something. Something's wrong.
Yeah, we gotta take $200 off for our forgetfulness.
Well, then what happened was 5 years later, she was still alive and everything. We were called back to do some other work for her, and so we made the bill. The bid $1,000. We went in to collect from her, and she said she had written out a check for $1,500. And so I said to Nellie, the bill's only supposed to be $1,000. You've written the check for $1,500. What's going on here? She said, you'll take $1,500 and not a penny less. Well, she had figured out what we had done. So I got that story in here about Nellie, and
Yeah.
I expand upon it and everything. So what do you think?
We could do just a quick Q&A if anyone has any questions about anything.
Yeah. Oh,
Are you the ghost writer?
yeah, I know. This is the Ghost Rider.
I had to, so he has over 40 years has written I don't know how many hundreds of stories. So I spent a couple of years getting them all typed into the computer because they were all written by typewriter. And then I had to read through thousands and thousands of pages and try to find like a cohesive through line that could be put into a book. And in so many of the stories, I found the theme of generosity and kindness, and then the story of the $100 thing. And I thought, oh, the Hundredaire. So even though some of his stories might have been like 35, 40 pages long, I would just find like the essence of like the kindness and generosity portion and put that in there. And so
some years back, my typewriter failed on me. So I went
That's
over.
when I typed them all.
Oh yeah, that's right. She typed.
I typed a bunch of them.
And so then I went over to Walmart to the area where they sell the computers and everything. So I said to the clerk, I'm looking for a new typewriter. And the guy said, you're looking for a what? I said, a new typewriter. But then he called over to a lady at the next counter. She said, this gentleman is looking for a new typewriter. And they both burst into laughing. Okay.
I have a story about Donnie and his $100 bill.
Oh,
We met Donnie and Arlene in 1973. We all lived at Marway Trailer Park, if you know that prosperous part of town.
Yeah.
And we just, they didn't have kids, we didn't have kids, so Harvey was looking for work or something, and I think Don's psychic, because out of the clear blue sky, he calls up and says, Harvey, I could really use some help painting. And this has happened 4 or 5 times over the last 50 years.
Yeah.
And he knew that, and by now we had 2 kids, he knew that financially, we were really struggling. So one Saturday morning, Harvey and I get up, we go to the mailbox, and there's just one $100 bill in our mailbox. And that could have been $1 million
Yeah.
to us at the time. And he has denied it and this was 40 years ago, 30 years
Yeah,
ago.
yeah.
And he has denied it
Yeah.
all these years.
The Hundredaire,
Yeah.
$100 a year, what, Hundredaire.
The Hundredaire.
Yeah, Hundredaire.
It does exist.
Yes. So you may not have $1 million to give, but what could you give? Could you give 100? How could you,
Yeah.
help the least of these? And like Scripture says, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. So maybe some of you guys will be inspired to slip a $100 bill in someone's mailbox and
Yeah.
not tell
Should I
them.
give my address?
All right, thank you all for coming. If you haven't got a copy yet, Dad's here to sign books. I also brought 3 of my books if anyone's interested. And we just appreciate you showing up to support this lifelong dream of Dad's. And God bless you all.